Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question: how to coordinate martial arts training with mass and strength gaining for someone taking a job in security? Also, what program do you recommend for martial arts training? Is there an easy to understand system, sets, reps, progression, model, blah, blah, blah. By program, I mean an online program, as there are no trainers in my area that I can afford. Okay, this is easy enough. Look, you're not training to be a competitive MMA fighter. You just need to get bigger, stronger, faster, to have more strength for your security work. You're taking martial arts for doing security. You don't need to overthink this. Any strength-based program will work for you. It could be anything from my novice 5x5 to my linear hypertrophy program up to my intermediate off-season strength athlete program. Any of those are going to work. You just need to get bigger, stronger, faster. That's all you need to do. So remember, if you want to get faster, lots of explosive work, heavy lifting. And truth be told, if you need to get more explosive after you build a base and go on some sort of low rep powerlifting program, pretty straightforward. You don't need to do anything special there. Now, if you're, again, a specialized athlete, it might be different. We might need to look at a specific protocol for you if you start trying to become an actual competitive athlete in MMA. But in which case, if you're going to be confronted in any sort of security job with people who actually have real MMA backgrounds, you're either going to want backup or you're going to want to use your weapon anyways. So it becomes a non-issue at that point. All right, next question. For novice program, if for a few occasional days time is an issue, would doing the cutting version be better or worse than doing the linear progression program for that single session? All right, guys, I wrote the Linear Hypertrophy Program, which you guys know I have an article on, a video on, everything, for people who either, one, can't fully recover from the novice program, or two, don't have the time commitment to run the novice program. It sounds to me like you're falling into the latter category. The novice program is intended for people who have large amounts of free time to do relatively long sessions, up to an hour and a half or longer, 3 times a week. If you're having time commitment issues and your goals are size, not necessarily the full combination of size and strength, you will put on just as much size on the linear hypertrophy program. For the majority of people, you'll gain just as much size with a little less time in the gym. That's probably the better choice, unless you really want the extra strength component from the novice program. So again, the latter is more time efficient. That's what you should be running if you can't commit to the full novice program. All right, next question. For hypertrophy, is hitting the same muscle 4 times per week better than 2 or 3 times per week? Is more frequency and thus more volume and not better when driving for hypertrophy? I don't mean this for squats and deadlifts, of course, but rather other hypertrophy-specific work such as arms, etc. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks. This gets really tricky. I usually recommend the ultra-high frequency for motor unit learning. This is to learn the skills and neural efficiency to get stronger at your big lifts. For purely hypertrophy, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to see a scenario to where the majority of people are going to make faster gains off of more than about 3 times per week. And as you get more advanced, very, very advanced lifters oftentimes don't even see an improvement over 2 per week, but that's subject to debate based upon the scientific literature. It's because you gain muscle so slowly as an advanced lifter that adding that extra day per week, the extra muscle gains that you make could be so small that they're not being measured with the equipment over a course of only a few months. But up to about 3 times is going to give you the most gains. But again, beyond that, you start running into issues of, yeah, sure, you might technically come up with more muscle protein synthesis uptime, but it doesn't seem to be enough of a difference to make a difference, because it's not necessarily helping you progress faster. And having 4 or 5 days per week with elevated muscle protein synthesis from training seems to be enough as long as progressive overload is going. You don't really seem to gain muscle any faster going beyond that, purely because you're not necessarily increasing the workload any quicker as a result of it. Just purely the muscle protein synthesis, but it might be producing inferior workloads because you can't recover quite as well, might not be getting in any more volume. So it's a trade-off to where you may not be seeing any further gains beyond that. It's really probably not worth it for you, because in the long run, lots of high volume work, particularly high rep work, not doing your strength training, power reps 3 and under, at a really high frequency, just maybe putting more connective tissue inflammation on you with no further gains in muscle mass. All right, next question. Does clenbuterol just speed up your metabolism, or is it also anti-catabolic? Thanks. Oh, you mean this stuff? Yeah, as most of you may or may not know, I'm a fan of clenbuterol. And for those curious, I'm going to address it slightly. I got to be very careful how I address this topic. Yes, clenbuterol is legal to possess inside the U.S. without a prescription. It's not a controlled substance. There are some rules on people selling it specifically for human use, but having it, perfectly legal. The problem with your question is that you don't fully seem to understand it. Yes, it's a fat burner. And yeah, there's a lot of arguments on forums by a bunch of dumbasses who don't know anything. They don't know how to read studies. That's the majority of bodybuilders are basically idiots. Try not to read too much into what they say. They'll have you thinking that trenbolone binds to progestin receptors and all sorts of silly shit that's never been shown in scientific studies if you read too many forums. So what I would say there is realize that clen is actually anabolic. There are plenty of studies showing clen is anabolic, but it's very, very mildly anabolic. It's usually 80 micrograms and higher where it becomes anabolic, but we're talking very, very mild anabolic effects. And so therefore, since it is anabolic, obviously that's going to be anti-catabolic. That's what you need to be looking at anyways, anabolic instead of anti-catabolic, because something that's anti-catabolic may be a bad thing for muscle growth. And that's a whole other topic, and I've tried to explain to people in the past with cortisol and anabolic versus catabolic reactions in the body. Anti-catabolic isn't necessarily a good thing if you want to gain muscle. You need to be looking at anabolic response. But yeah, clenbuterol is mildly anabolic. It can become more anabolic, but the problem is even at the doses that it's mildly anabolic at, you can start getting some pretty strong side effects. And I don't want to really discuss the human studies because it could be reckless for me to discuss the human studies that have been done on people who have heart issues who've been given clen at much, much higher doses than bodybuilders and athletes use it at. Because one, it could be dangerous. And two, you can't really train at those doses. At 80 or 100, a lot of people start running into major cramping issues. 200, 300 micrograms cramping can become so bad that training becomes difficult. And then when you get to the doses that we've seen the really profound anabolic effects in people who sit around on their ass and don't train and they recomposition, where it's actually a pretty strong anabolic, those are doses that you wouldn't be able to train or exercise at all, which is what they're giving to people who have had heart issues in the study. So I don't want to explain how high they go because it's pretty damn high, but it could be actually dangerous for a person who exercises to try to use the doses that are in those studies. So I don't want to give the specifics because mainly I don't want to kill anybody. Because quite frankly, the doses that we see that it produces a profound anabolic effect. If you try to go take a jog or run or go lift weights, you might drop dead of a heart attack. But yeah, it is anabolic. It is a fat burner and it is anabolic. But just remember the doses most people are going to use it is very, very mildly anabolic. It's going to be less so than a very low dose of steroids or testosterone. All right, next question. At work, our hours have been increased to 60 a week for the foreseeable future, and due to being a single dad and life in general, I cannot make it the time to lift 3 times a week. I should be able to twice a week though. I was in the middle of running your linear hypertrophy program, and my plan is to just run workout A on Monday and Thursday, then cut the deadlift sets to 2. Are you good with this? Will the progression stay the same? Do you have anything better to offer? Keep up the good work. Thanks. No, what I'm going to tell you is if you're going to run the linear hypertrophy program and you can only get in the gym twice a week instead of 3, run the program exactly as written. It's just going to take you 50% longer to finish each cycle of it. Does that make sense? Since you can only get in twice, I want you to get the full 3 sessions with the rotating through the things. And so what you would normally do in 6 weeks on the program is going to take you 9 weeks. So go ahead and run the sessions, just space them out a little further apart. I would much rather see you do it that way than you try to run the full progression while skipping a workout every week. Don't do it that way. Just run the full program and take longer to get there. And you know what? You'll still get the same results. It's just going to take you 50% longer to see the same gains in muscle mass and strength. But you'll still get there, and that's fine, man. I mean, twice a week, if you can run a structured program like that and stretch it out and only go twice a week, you're still going to make progress. You're still going to be doing better than most of the people in the gym who aren't on a structured program. Hey, Jason, since the amount of muscle that one can build without steroids is rather limited, can lifters who train primarily for strength obtain the same size as one who focuses on bodybuilding, assuming both train drug-free? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. What you're going to find, we can argue all day long about strength versus hypertrophy or power versus hypertrophy. Look, you need to really argue about power work versus hypertrophy, because that's the only real difference. Any sort of real strength work that you think of as strength training is going to put on just as much size on you as hypertrophy training will. It's when we start coming down and training for maximum speed and power that there's a trade-off to where you're getting a little more power instead of hypertrophy, and that's geared towards explosive one-time use strength. Strength work, stuff like 5 reps, 6 reps, all of that stuff puts just as much size on you per the amount of strength that you gain as hypertrophy work. Now, that being said, irrespective of which style you train, because you're going to have less muscle mass potential with each year that you train drug-free, and it's going to be dramatically diminished returns, you will reach a threshold where even if you're training for maximum power and then strength behind it, that you might lag slightly behind early on in the first couple of years of someone who's training purely for hypertrophy type work, but eventually you're going to catch them because, again, their returns are going to be so diminished and yours are, that eventually you're going to reach that point anyways. So you're not going to see much, if any, difference in the long term between the two training styles in terms of overall size. And I think the difference that people forget there is that the difference between, let's say, the strength training like that versus the bodybuilding is that bodybuilding style training is going to put more focus on all the little support muscles and making sure that your bicep is maximally developed in proportion to your chest and other things. And so they end up looking bigger in more proportion due to spending a lot of time sculpting and building all those little weak points up so that they're more balanced, rather than just overall size, which comes from strength training. So that's a big difference there too. But you could always do the best of both worlds and do power building style training and still achieve the bodybuilder look, if that's your goal, while training primarily for strength and power. And again, just remember that in the grand scheme of things, nobody is going to get massive while being reasonably lean drug-free, by internet standards at least. By the standards of the normal person walking down the street, yeah, you can be very impressive drug-free, but you're never going to reach internet standards of impressive. All right, next question. Can you please explain why the people who we see who have taken steroids have bigger traps and shoulders? Why do the drugs seem to affect this area of the body differently, not just size, but shape as well? Because the deltoids, the traps, and the pectoralis minor have more androgen receptors, which is the receptors that anabolic steroids use, than the other muscles of the body, whereas in things like the calves have the lowest androgen receptor count. It's pretty straightforward. The thing to remember, though, is that there are other effects and other anabolic drugs a lot of people use that will still work on everything else. But overall, yeah, guys who use a fair amount of gear are going to tend to have bigger shoulders overall, irrespective of how they train. And at a certain threshold, any style of training for a guy on enough drugs is going to build big shoulders, even if it's not very intelligent or well done. And so that can also be a good indicator of how much drugs somebody uses. Because the thing is, a lot of people need to realize thousands and thousands and thousands of people use anabolic steroids who don't admit to it, other than when they're talking with other steroid users who will deny it flat out. And so you can't always go by people's word, but that is something that you can look at. You can oftentimes look at the ratios, and this isn't universally true, but you can oftentimes look at the ratios of things like how big their delts and traps are compared to other muscle groups if they're on a balanced program, and get an idea of how much gear someone uses, because that's the thing to consider also. Use and dosage and amount varies massively among even casual users. There are plenty of guys out there who use 5 times as much gear per year as someone else who's in the gym who they might even work out with and train with regularly. So again, that shoulder size is a good indication oftentimes of how much they use, but that's not always true. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I'm wanting to start your linear hypertrophy program, but I would like to know, will I be able to handle it? I work a hard manual job. I work on farms, raking and tampering concrete, and come home wrecked. Would I still build a good amount of muscle if I only do 1 workout a week, or do I need to stick to your program? Thanks, keep up the good work. You know what the thing is, what you find is that people who do lots of manual labor for a living are oftentimes adapted to doing manual labor. If you go in and you run the full program after work 3 times per week, once you're used to doing manual labor, you will be sore and tired at first, but eventually you will adapt to the workload. And sure, because your manual labor job makes you more fatigued, you might gain muscle 10 or 20 or even 30% slower than someone who is more sedentary. Running the same program, you're still going to gain significant amounts of muscle mass, and eventually you will adapt to the workload, and you won't be any more tired than you were from your normal training and your normal work day anymore. So yeah, go ahead and run the full program. It'll be fine. Just ease into it slowly and make sure that you have time to adapt, recover, make sure you're getting sufficient sleep and plenty of food. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.